If you've ever been so embarrassed you literally could die, you gotta hear this. So here I am, straight out of high school. It was a couple years since my last physical and I was due, so I scheduled a doctor's appointment for a regular physical. You have no idea how this is going to end. I get to my appointment and I'm ready for whatever. Open my mouth and say, take big, deep breaths in and out. And yes, drop my pants, turn and cough. Then he says, we should take a urine sample, and I'm like, easy peasy. So I get a cup from the nurse, head to the bathroom and splash all over to get a sample. You think it's easy, but it's not like a faucet. Once you start, you can't stop. I cleaned up, walked out and gave the cup of my pee to the nurse, and head home full of pride thinking I surely passed with flying colours. Nope. The nurse calls later that afternoon and I'm thinking, I only slept with a couple girls. What could it be? She begins to tell me that my test came back abnormal and that I should see a specialist. What specialist? I ask. She says we found an abnormal amount of white blood cells in your urine and we'd like you to see a urologist. Great, here we go. I schedule a urologist appointment a week later and I'm thinking the worst. Could it be an STD or worse yet some type of disease? Maybe I have a defective ding-dong? I have no clue. I nervously walk in, sit down and wait my turn, gripping the chair with both hands like I'm about to take off on a rocket ship. There are other guys in the waiting room all waiting their turns, but it's obvious that I'm the youngest of this space shuttle crew. Finally, my name gets called and I sit down in the exam room. About 20 minutes later, the doctor comes in and explains what the nurse told me over the phone. Here I am thinking, it'll just be another urine sample, right? He then says, I'd like to start with a bladder scope. Great, they're going to cut me open and look at my bladder. This obviously won't happen today, and this will need to be scheduled out. Nope. He says, no, we won't cut you open. We'll take a thin tube with a light and camera at the end and insert it into your urethra. I am visibly shaking at this point. What's my urethra? Is that a medical term for belly button? I ask. No, it's where you urinate from, he says. I immediately turn white and start sweating. I begin to tell him, I don't think this is necessary. I've only slept with 2 girls and there must be some type of mistake. Can we schedule this for another time? No, we have it scheduled for today, and trust me, it won't hurt or take long, he says. I get taken back into another room where they lay me down to prepare me for the procedure. I'm literally shaking at this point, thinking I just want to go home and crawl under the covers. Then about 4 other nurses walk into the room. Apparently, they are students who are observing the procedure for educational purposes. WTF, I'm thinking. This older female nurse, probably in her 60s, then comes up to me and says, I need to prepare the area for the procedure. She then proceeds to clean my junk with this orange-reddish liquid called iodopovidone. Oh no, it's been some time since my last encounter with my ex, but this is not good. She's cleaning the area like it's her last supper, and here I am getting a rock, hard bonsai tree. I grasp the table, and before I can start to think of my grandmother, the inevitable happens. I had no control. It was so fast, I had no time to think. It, and I mean IT, comes out. The nurse takes a step back and immediately places a towel over and says, it's not the first time. The procedure was quick, and I got dressed and walked out of the office with my tail between my legs. I get home and shower like I've just been violated. Thankfully, everything was just fine, except for my pride. I haven't had a physical since. So back in 2011, I was majoring in theatre arts at the local college and was in the theatrical makeup class. It was the only class I had on Fridays, and I frequently came home in whatever I had done that day in class to show my dad. It was the week of Halloween, and our teacher was teaching us Bloodies, gore makeup. And my horror-obsessed haunted house scare actor, Fleet Street is the best stage blood, boasting self, was going wild. While most of the other students did a burn, a few bruises, maybe a gash on the arm, I made myself look like roadkill that also got mauled by a bear. It was a lot, enough to get me pulled over by a concerned campus cop when I was leaving. I went home covered in fake blood, looking like hell and loving it. My dad told me to keep it on so my niece and nephews could see when they got there after school. They knew I had makeup class. I wasn't going to scar them. So around 2:45 p.m., I hear a knock at the door. Well, I decided to answer like a zombie to make them laugh. I should note, I realize I should have probably checked to make sure it was them. I answer the door slowly, dragging a foot, moaning, brains, to see two Jehovah's Witnesses go green and absolutely bolt back to their bikes. I literally was still processing what had just happened as they peeled around the corner and my brother showed up with the kids. To this day, my dad says he sees them actively avoid our door and once heard them refer to it as the home of the devil. My grandfather always wanted a daughter, but he got 3 sons whom he loved deeply. He hoped for a granddaughter to spoil, and instead got 4 rowdy man-bear boys, and loved all of us more than I can describe in words. He was the best father-grandfather any of us could hope for, and eventually gave up on the idea of a girl, though he adored all the wives and always treated them the same as his sons and grandsons. The situation changed drastically in the next generation. First, my oldest cousin had 3 girls in quick succession. Then my second oldest cousin adopted a little girl. I had twin girls the same year as my niece's adoption, and my youngest cousin had another little girl last year. And my grandfather could not be happier. He basically turns his house into a girl's dream house for every holiday and travels to my and the cousins' houses literally every week. This weekend was my grandmother's birthday anniversary. She has passed away, and we decided to celebrate her birthday instead of her death anniversary. And his house was turned into a princess castle, complete with a petting zoo in the yard, special decorations made for each girl, more little girls' toys than in most toy stores, and he was wearing a pink monstrosity that was supposed to be a prince costume. He is 79, for the record, and I swear that spending time with the horde of little girls makes him younger and younger. So the moral of the story is, love your kids, love your family, don't obsess over the gender of your kids, and life will reward you in the end. So, myself and my husband were out one evening a couple of years ago, sat in the car chatting down by the water, parked outside a pub. My husband is one of these people who likes to help all animals or insects that he can. So you can imagine how this story may turn out. We heard a thud, so we got out of the car, and a pheasant had flown in to the wall of the pub and landed on the floor. So my husband immediately went up to it to see how it was. This is not an area where you would normally see a pheasant. The pheasant was fine, was just a bit dazed and in shock. So, my husband decided we should try and take it to a more pheasant-appropriate place in the car. This would be around a 15-minute drive. So I agreed, as I felt sorry for it. The plan was, my husband was to wrap the pheasant up in his jacket, and I was to have the pheasant on my lap. So we did. Well, we got about 10 minutes up the road, and the pheasant was still in shock and sat still on my lap. My husband decides it's cold, and without warning, puts on the fan in the car. The pheasant shit itself. It was flying around the car, I was screaming, and my husband was still trying to drive. It was flapping all over the car, pooping as it went. My husband pulled over to the nearest area with grass and trees, and we opened the car door to get the pheasant out. Well, that was another 20-minute job. I know, I cannot believe this story is true either, but believe me, it is not an experience I want again. Jack, a COBOL programmer, after years of being taken for granted and treated as a technological dinosaur by all the Unix programmers and client-server programmers and website developers, finally started getting some respect in 1994. He'd become a private consultant specializing in year 2000 conversions. He was working short-term assignments. He was working 70 and 80 and even 90 hours a week. But it was worth it. After a few years of this relentless, mind-numbing work, Jack started having problems sleeping and began having anxiety dreams about the year 2000. It had reached a point where even the thought of the year 2000 made him nearly violent. He must have suffered some sort of breakdown because all he could think about was finding a way he could avoid the year 2000 and all that came with it. Jack made a deal with the company that specialized in cryogenics to have himself frozen until March 15, 2000. This was a very expensive process and totally automated. He was thrilled. The next thing he would know, is he'd wake up in the year 2000, after the New Year celebrations and computer debacles, after the leap year. Nothing else to worry about except getting on with his life. He was put into his cryogenic receptacle. The technicians set the revive date. He was given injections to slow his heartbeat to a bare minimum, and that was that. The next thing that Jack saw was an enormous and very modern room filled with excited people. They were all shouting, "I can't believe it," and "It's a miracle," and "He's alive." There were cameras, unlike any he'd ever seen, and equipment that looked like it came out of science fiction movie. Someone who was obviously a spokesperson for the group stepped forward. Jack couldn't contain his enthusiasm. "Is it over?" he asked. "Is 2000 already here? Are the millennial parties and promotions and crises all over and done with?" The spokesman explained that there had been a problem with the programming of the timer on Jack's cryogenic receptacle. It hadn't been year 2000 compliant. It was actually 8,000 years later, not the year 2000. But the spokesman told Jack that he shouldn't get excited. Someone important wanted to speak to him. A wall-sized projection screen displayed the image of a man that looked very much like Bill Gates. This man was Prime Minister of Earth. He told Jack not to be upset, that this was a wonderful time to be alive, that there was world peace and no more starvation, that the space program has been reinstated and there were colonies on the moon and on Mars. That technology had advanced to such a degree that everyone had virtual reality interfaces which allowed them to contact anyone else on the planet, or to watch any entertainment, or to hear any music recorded anywhere. "That sounds terrific," said Jack. "But I'm curious, why is everybody so interested in me?" "Well," said the Prime Minister, "the year 10,000 is just around the corner, and it says in your files that you know COBOL. So, I went on a date last Friday with this guy I matched with on Bumble. Let's call him Mike. Mike seemed pretty cool in his profile. He had the whole adventurous but down-to-earth vibe going on. He's into hiking, trying new food, and even mentioned that he likes going to art galleries, which was a major plus in my book. We decided to meet up at this trendy little brunch spot in the city. I was already excited because, let's be real, brunch is the best meal of the day. Anyway, we get there, and it's one of those places with exposed brick, hanging plants, and everything on the menu sounds amazing. We start off with small talk, which goes pretty well. He's funny and knows how to keep the conversation going without being too intense. Then the waiter comes to take our order, and that's when things get interesting. I order the avocado toast because, duh, it's my go-to. When Mike hears this, he sort of chuckles and says, "You're not serious, right? Avocado toast is the most overrated thing ever. It's like the pumpkin spice of brunch." I laughed it off at first, thinking he was just joking, but then he went on this mini rant about how avocado toast is basic, overpriced, and how people only order it to post on Instagram. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there, staring at him, wondering if this guy is actually serious or just trying to be funny. It got a little awkward after that, but I decided to just let it go. I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinions, right? But then, as the date went on, I started noticing other little things. He kept dropping these subtle comments about influencers, basic girls, and how people care too much about appearances these days. Don't get me wrong, I'm not some Instagram-addicted girl who lives for likes, but it kind of rubbed me the wrong way that he was so judgmental about something as harmless as brunch preferences. The rest of the date was fine, but that whole conversation about the avocado toast just kept lingering in my mind. It made me realize that maybe he wasn't as open-minded as I originally thought. I mean, if he's that opinionated about something as silly as brunch, what's he going to be like about the big stuff? So now I'm sitting here sipping my iced coffee, which, by the way, I'm not ashamed to say I love, and wondering if I'm overthinking this, or if it's a legit red flag. This is an interesting story, happened a few years ago. Since I am a part of a fire department, we hear interesting stories, one being from the town next to us. Luckily, no one was seriously injured, but it was a what-the-hell moment. The firehouse that day was doing a blood drive, and the firefighters were working it. They heard a boom and went to investigate. It was a car accident. The car drove into the bay doors, damaged the door, And the fire truck. The truck was damaged enough to be taken out of service. They go to check the passenger and got a shock. A baby snake was wrapped around her arm. Turns out later on, they found out she was inebriated, stole the snake from a local Petco, and hightailed it out of there and crashed. Don't know if karma came into play, but she was probably arrested for many things. Diving while intoxicated, theft and property damage.